Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Saturday morning for this webinar on managing money well. We felt like this is a really crucial topic, not just because we're in a pandemic, but just in general. I was just listening to a podcast on money and its relationship to happiness, and it was talking about how money can't really make you happy beyond a certain point, but it can make you happy up to a certain point. And the idea was that money can't buy you happiness, but it can keep you from misery. And up to that degree, money actually has the power. There is a relationship between happiness and money, but beyond that, there's not much relationship between money and happiness. And sometimes having too much money can actually make you unhappy. So it's very interesting to see that. But we began this idea with this webinar with the idea that we really want to equip Christians to think about financial stewardship. I feel like I'm not out of line when I say as a pastor that sometimes the church overemphasizes only one aspect of financial stewardship, which is tithing or giving. But financial stewardship is so much broader than that. It's so much, there's so much involved in financial stewardship, things like making money and investing money, saving money, being generous towards others. So there's a lot that goes into the idea of financial stewardship, and so much of our tithing and giving actually comes out of the other aspects of financial stewardship. So we felt like it's important to have a conversation around managing money well, and that's the reason we're doing this webinar. And let me just introduce you to our speaker today. And actually, before I do that, let me just set up some house rules for the Zoom call. It's a Zoom call, so you're welcome to keep your videos on or off as you please. It would be great to see you though, and keep this as real as possible. So if you're comfortable with putting your video on, that would be great. But we'd love for you to keep your mic off so that there's only one speaker at a time. And what we're going to do in the webinar is first we're going to have Mr. Matthew Titus speak to us, and then we're going to have a generous time of question and answer. And I'll facilitate that and moderate that. So you can post your questions in the chat, and I'll post them. I'll pose them to Mr. Matthew Titus, and we can have a Q&A session as well. So that's just the general flow. We're going to begin with Mr. Matthew Titus, have a Q&A, and we'll close it at that. So let me introduce you to Mr. Matthew Titus. He is the Senior Advisor of the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy. He has also served as advisory board member of Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority and advisory board member of the Microfinance Development and Equity Fund for NABARD. He was also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises for approximately 4 years. So we're very glad to have Mr. Titus with us today, and I'm just going to hand it over to him to lead us through the rest of the talk.
So basically, the way we're going to do this is look at this in 3 parts, partly or centrally in looking at money and managing it well, especially in some senses, you need to be at the center of this, you know, your approach, your faith, your vision, and your vocation. Then given, you know, where we are in life, in whatever form of community we are, whether it is a single life or the joint life or the community life where we are looking after our parents, there are issues over there that we need to consider. And finally, I will touch on aspects of money, which is, you know, how do you invest? How do you think about all of that money that you have? That's broadly the way that I've structured this. And we'll kind of go through some of the stuff as soon as possible. But I'll try and focus on the first 2 points. The last one we can even deal with in the Q&A. Yeah? So the past few weeks have seen millions of migrants on the move. 11 million people at last count have moved back over the roads. But one of the things that struck me during this time was how many people have been fed in roads, in shelters, and in villages. And it reminds me of that beautiful passage in the Psalms where God's promise about his love and his hope, and how like he said, the last two verses of this, to deliver them from death and to keep them alive in famine. That's the ultimate in financial risk. And really God does that and is present in that. And we saw that during this time where 11 million people, if you had a feeding program, would definitely have, would have gone crazy, but they got fed. So as we kind of go forward, it's important to kind of recognize that provision of God, but at the same time, recognize yourself also and recognize the whole series of emotions that tend to, overwhelm us. One is we get overwhelmed completely by our problems. So that's a no-no. We get worried, which is really not advisable in terms of money. And we panic if losses happen, which is the worst. So basically, I think patience and a certain level of diligence is the way we need to approach this. And I've called this section a renewed mind, taking from Paul, because I really find that, Paul's been on the spot in terms of inviting us to think of ourselves as much more creative beings than we think we are. Primarily at this time, there are so many ways that you can actually do things and enjoy them at the same time. So we need to make sure that we strike that balance in what we do and what we enjoy, what we celebrate. So Paul's sitting in Corinth, writing in the book of Romans, and he's actually carrying, he's sitting with cash which he's collected for the poor in Jerusalem. And he's talking about the heart of the gospel. And in chapter 7, verse 4, he talks about how when Christ died, he took that entire rule-dominated, this is a translation from the Message, not the NIV. And I find this translation very interesting because he says he took that whole rule-dominated way of life down with him, left it in the tomb, and he talks of the two central ingredients, which I think we need as we approach money, to marry a resurrected life and to bear an offspring of faith. And I think that's very important in addressing this whole issue, that we've got to remember that we have a resurrected life and a faith that we need to kind of put into practice. So I don't want this session and all that I say about money to be about rules. You have to make this yours, and that is a sign of knowing that you're managing it well, once you adopt it and make it yours. These are some guidelines that I will talk about. But even these will be outdated in 2 years' time. I remember what I used to teach 4 or 5 years ago. They don't apply anymore. Which is why I want to invite you to start looking at skill, your vision of what you and your family want to be, and to construct your path. And hopefully, I will hear a few years later that one of you are doing a new format session on the same problem. Because that's the way this whole thing has to be structured. It has to be dynamic and responsive. So basically, how do we kind of have this renewed mind? So we see ourselves and our family as the hotel that's in the middle of this lake. And then we see our vocation, skill, hobby, and job all contributing to building that lake around the hotel. It's the moat. It is what protects and defends the family and the community. And as you kind of look at aspects of money and as we think about it, and as we think about the information that I give you or share with you, it is to help you build that lake around that building. It's the moat that we want to kind of recognize. So the first thing is basically don't overthink too much. We have a problem that we have to cross, but doesn't mean that you need to kind of obsess too much about it. But the great thing is, post this lockdown, we now know a few things. We know what our basic living expenses are and what our discretionary expenses are, because that's not worked out completely. The one thing, given the present economic situation, just be extremely careful of loans right now, because loans are linked to interest rates, which are really not fixed. Nobody is giving you a fixed rate nowadays. So just some two important highlights over here. Be careful of loans and the interest rates that you borrow on. And second is, if you are the only person who's earning, you should look for building skills and look at doing other things. Just thinking about, thinking of all the skills that you possess. Okay, so if you want to be a teacher, priest, wildlife specialist, and a dancer, or a mission doctor, in fact, I'm a child of a mission doctor, your earnings are going to be limited. But if that is your vocation and your contribution to the world, stay focused on that. It's very, very important if you have to succeed with money. Secondly, one of the most important things, and I like Paul's passage in the Romans especially, where he talks about how the world influences us. And we don't kind of see that. We're not taught much about that. We're taught about sins of the flesh, but we really taught about, what the world and what the devil's role in shaping our mind is. And Paul, writing in Romans, says the mind should be shaped by the Spirit and what the Spirit desires, and not according to the flesh. We unfortunately do not challenge our own, within quotes, flesh desires. We just kind of adopt them and accept them. So if we start saving, we have to be patient before we can harvest the benefits of that saving. Previously, when I was young as you all and were trying to make investments, everything would take 10 months, 10 days to 3 months before you would know that your investment went through. Today, in a matter of few clicks, you can do everything. Yeah. So as we kind of think about money and as we think, how do we kind of take this whole thing forward? Yeah. So just some quick.
With the Motley Fool Money Extra, I'm Chris Hill. Spending a lot of time thinking about money would be fine if it led to better decisions, but generally it doesn't. So why do we make bad decisions with money? Dan Ariely is a professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University. He's also the author of several best-selling books, including Dollars and Cents, How We Misthink Money and How to Spend Smarter. According to Ariely, a lot of our bad decision-making is fueled by the environment of our spending.
So there are mainly kind of two types of ways in which we're bad. The first one is that money is all about opportunity cost, right? Every time you spend $5 on a cup of coffee, you should be thinking to yourself, what else wouldn't I be able to buy if I spend $5 on a cup of coffee? But the reality is it's really hard to think about. Just think to yourself, when was the last time you thought about opportunity cost? Money is a wonderful thing, and being about opportunity cost is part of the wonderful thing that money is. This problem. Money is all about opportunity cost, but it's hard to think about opportunity cost. The second thing is that many of our decisions are about now versus later. And when it comes to now versus later, we often make bad decisions. And this includes decisions about overeating and under-exercising and texting and driving and you name it. So what happens is that we're just not, and then maybe the final thing is that the environment around us doesn't necessarily want us to think carefully about money. The environment around us often wants us to spend without thinking. So there's something called the pain of paying. And the pain of paying is the idea that when we pay with cash, we feel bad and we don't spend as much. When we pay with a credit card or Apple Pay or Android Pay, we don't feel as bad and we're likely to spend more. And if you think about where the payment industry is going, it's going in the direction of getting us to spend more, thinking less, and therefore saving less. So all of those things together mean that it's really, really hard to think about money the right way, and the environment mostly doesn't help.
So clearly, there are some behavioral and psychological aspects that tend to dominate us. And in fact, very much what Paul was saying, that you need to kind of watch your mind, watch your behavior, watch what the world is telling you to do. So here are quick 5 insights, which Dan talked about a few of them. So basically the first one, everything is designed to get us to spend, and they do a good job at that. Secondly, we tend to get overwhelmed by big decisions. We tend to be fearful sometimes of the complexity of decisions and so stay away. But we need to remember again, like the psalmist reminds us, that he makes firm the steps of those who delight in him. And even though we may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him in his hand. So be brave, kind of do things. Yeah? Thirdly, our fear is reinforced by our perception problem. One is where losses hurt much more than our gains. So if you kind of lose money, or if you kind of, overspend sometimes, we're very extremely harsh on ourselves, because we tend to feel much more pain when we lose anything rather than when we gain anything. We, very rarely remember the good things that we do with our money. We kind of tend to go after ourselves much more. We are harsher on ourselves. So it's important to remember that. Fourthly is FOMO. This is a real problem. Most millennials and their spending habits, they say there's a very high correlation between spending and this fear of missing out. And, therefore, this is important to look at, the way we think, the way we construct ideas, and the way we kind of do some things. Finally, this point about discretionary spending, which is delayed gratification. You kind of need to consciously actually hold yourself back and think about how you are spending, what is it that you can avoid, what is it that therefore you can do better, and attempt to kind of do that. In fact, I keep saying it's very important to have a support group. We don't realize how much the world influences our spending patterns, how much the world influences what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And a support group, it's like an addiction. Therefore, support group helps to kind of look at what the alternatives are. Many people in their church itself would have identified good saving instruments, would have done some research, would have kind of put small bits of money aside and have a good tool. We can learn from each other. And therefore, there's so much more that a support group can do as we kind of go forward in terms of looking at some of these issues. Basically, the old format of the family where we were part of communities, we always thought of communities and extended families as part of, interference. But we don't remember that it's actually part of insurance. There's so many big expenditures that come up, emergencies that we have to attend to, which kind of always throw us off. And I want to kind of walk you through this quickly, this table, how you kind of think of risk and how you think of uncertainty. So in finance, you have all of this terminology, but basically this is what it is. You have the brown colored boxes. Now these are boxes which are really, throw you completely out of gear. The ones in green are the ones in which you're somewhat prepared for it, but haven't thought through it well enough. The ones in blue are what you kind of are used to and you kind of deal with most of the time. What happens is that we need to think more consciously about the green boxes and the brown boxes. Yeah? And focus on what we need to do to kind of strengthen that. Because that is the way we kind of deal with risk and we deal with solution. Yeah? We deal with consequence and we think likelihood of the event happening. It's a financial thing, but it's all right. If you understand the color of the boxes, you're right on top of the situation. And that's what I think you need to kind of prepare for. So when you kind of do all your maths and do all your allocation, these are the 3 colors that you need to keep in mind and need to address. So in attempting to do that, how do you work your income? First of all, you need to remember that little drops of water actually count. This is just a simple slide that tells you if you save 4,000 rupees a month, For 35 years at 10%, you will end up getting 1.15 crore because it just compounds. It's a principle of finance. And we can talk about that later. But it's important because you never think, what will this get me? Where will this reach? But it actually can add up very quickly and can be of great benefit. Yeah. Because even though you would have saved, say, 16 lakhs, you can actually end up with interest that 16 lakhs becomes a crore. Yeah. The other thing is tax exemptions. We don't think about these tax exemptions very carefully. In fact, I had gone on a trek with this gentleman, and towards the end, he told me that in 30 years of his life, he had never paid tax because he would make use of all these exemptions that are there. And these are exemptions that actually the government gives you, also because for other reasons. The government wants long-term money. If you have to build the country, the secret of building any country is long-term money, which is why right from Sukanya, which is savings for daughters, to 5-year term deposits, to equity-linked ELSS schemes, all of these are long-term money. And they want long-term money to come into the economy, which is why they're giving you a tax break. Yeah? So remember that. And there are 9 exemptions that are available. This might have changed with the present budget being passed, but I think it's more or less the same. Yeah? Then beyond that, there's another exemption available, which is 80C, which even takes care of if you have disabled people in your family. You get a tax break on your income. We never kind of look at that. Then if you have, all these illnesses, which are fairly severe, you get a tax break for that. But we kind of don't look at that. And if you actually are a young millennial wanting to buy a house, the government gives you a tax break on your income for the loan that you are repaying. Interest that you pay to the finance company, you got a complete break on that. In fact, I'm still, I think 10 years ago this was introduced, and we had taken a loan to buy our flat, and that's kind of paid off with great benefit from this provision of the tax. So it's something that where you're encouraged to kind of think about acquiring these gifts. So there are a whole range of them. I don't want to kind of stay put with them, but basically that's the way you kind of think about it. Yeah. The other thing is the economy. Essentially, this chart basically, and I point to this thing on crude, tells you how serious the downturn is, how serious the slowdown is. And therefore, you need to be careful because there's been a fairly sustained problem in the economy, which has been compounded by different kinds of mismanagement. And therefore, like I said, many of the rules will change, many of the things will change. But how bad it is, you can see in just looking at the price of crude. When Manmohan Singh took over in 2014, the price that you paid for a liter of petrol is the same when it was $114 or $120 a barrel, and now it's $40 a barrel. Just tells you how much tax the government is having to collect to make up for a slowing economy. The other thing is saving in gold. And I first heard this 20, 30 years ago when actually I went to a lecture where German Gray was speaking, and she was talking about how gold is the best form of savings for women. And the point she was making that time was not about inflation or anything. She was just saying that, once you have a child, and once you kind of go through all the things that your body subjects you to, it's very difficult to kind of wake up in the morning and look at net asset value of mutual funds, look at what is happening to your savings. 20,000 things that you need to look at even when you save. Yeah. So she told them basically, and this is speaking to a whole lot of women at Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember where it was. But she said, just go and buy gold. Yeah. Take care of everything with that. And when your child grows up, you can take care of it. When you need money, you go and mortgage it. It's absolutely fine. But now everybody is actually buying gold because of various things happening in the economy. So, but you can buy gold now without actually physically buying gold. You can go buy an ETF. You can do different things. There are lots of new things that can be done with gold. But gold is definitely not to be looked at like the way you say that was the way my mother saved money or something like that. It's actually the smart way to go now. Warren Buffett even is learning to buy gold after 50 years of saying that gold is bad. So where do I leave you? I leave you with this passage actually, which is from a passage in Proverbs. And the section is called in the NIV translation, a wife of noble character. But actually, if you see what she does, I think at any given point, if you forget the session, go to that section in the Bible, look at what it says, and just follow the rules for yourself. So the first thing she does is she spins wool and flax. She takes care of food for the family and servants. She invests in fields and plants vineyards. She is involved in trading and is profitable, and she sells linen to merchants. And she opens her arms to the poor. Yeah. So conceptually, there are 5 things that she's doing. Yeah. And I think that we as men and women together and young people, these are the 5 things we need to remember. The equivalent of being the smartest lake builder. So I call her the smartest lake builder, because the first thing she does is protection against elements, insurance. You need to protect what you have, your family, your income, your children, your education. Insurance is extremely important. And we are not taught to do that, to think about insurance like that. We're taught to do savings, but no insurance. By the time your savings accrue, that will be 30 years later, but you could be actually injured, damaged, fall ill, lose your job. All of that can happen between now and the 30 years. So the first thing, follow like the woman, like she did, wool and flax to protect the family. The first thing you need to think of is protection. The second thing she did is budgeting and bargaining for the family. The third thing she did is she invests in opportunity for both the home and for food. Then she invests in opportunity for gains. And finally, tithing and giving to the poor. So these are the 5 things that you kind of need to kind of look at when you kind of think of everything else together. So that's about it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Titus. That was really helpful. It's great to see such clarity, and you covered a lot in a little bit of time. So I'm sure that throws up a lot of questions. So we want to open it up to the questions that you may have. So what we're going to do is just invite your questions into the chat. So if you have a question, please feel free to post it publicly in the chat, or you can text it privately to Joshua Samuel. He's got the Redeemer logo in front of him. So look for Joshua Samuel and send it to him. Or you could even send it to me privately, and then I can read it out loud. So that's one way to remain anonymous if that's what you prefer. But if you're comfortable posting your question in the chat, go ahead and do that. And yeah, we'll wait for a few questions to come in. While we're waiting, Mr. Titus, maybe I can ask you the first question. What advice do you have for someone who's in debt and trying to get out?
So, and this is where I think we kind of need to recognize, the nature of debt, because just like I talked about, because it's compounding at close to, if it's credit card debt, you're compounding at close to 35 to 40% per annum. So it's huge. So that means, so debt, which is of high cost money, is extremely dangerous. So the first thing you need to do is get off high cost debt in whatever form it is, because there's no remedy to that, because if you kind of are in that, vicious circle, getting out at 40% per annum is almost impossible, So that's the low get low cost loan, get a personal loan, and a personal loan is close to 16%. A credit card debt is almost double that price. And with all the charges that go up, it actually touches 40-45%. So take a personal loan and return that credit card debt or any other high cost debt that you have, say from equivalent to money lenders or pawn guys or anybody else, So that is the first thing. The second thing is then you need to kind of look at what your discretionary expenditure is. And basically you're going to say no to that. I think discretionary expenditure is the first way to block it and to then start reducing the principal. And then you bring it down to a level where you can manage it before you start looking at new opportunities. And then, your new opportunities, whatever they are. And one thing you need to remember, this is something true for, we kind of, when we think about money, and this is why, Dan Ariely talks about it, it's a problem thinking about money. Because we think of money very linear, that it will go like this. And therefore we tend to get depressed that we're not ever going to reach there. But actually life is linear. It's got what they call a J curve. You keep working at your problem and suddenly you hit a point where, and this is where God's provision works. Yeah. It just kind of escalates and goes up. So you need to be patient with yourself and you need to believe that that J curve is going to happen. And then you'll kind of offload everything else that your debt has kind of put down on you. So, you got to be optimistic in dealing with this. And you got to believe actually that's the way the numbers work actually,
Great. We've got a bunch of questions pouring in, so let me jump straight into them. The first one, is it wrong to invest in speculative stock markets if you're a believer?
So I'll leave the believer part in the theology. I'm not a trained theologian, so I just kind of have applied theology. I'll leave that for Akshay to untangle. But in terms of just the church history, speculation was always driven by the Christians, even in the early period. And when you read the rise of industrialization in Europe, you will come across this thing called the Christian ethic, which interestingly is that the Christians, when they made money and they earned money, would never spend it on themselves. So they were actually the first speculators or investors in the rise of industrial Europe. So they would put the money back into industry because speculation is actually taking very high levels of risk in terms of finance, understanding that. So when you take high levels of risk, you're giving your money to somebody to do venture, which you think will fail almost. Yeah. But unfortunately, now, they look like crazy devices when they came up. Now we think of them as great technology and driving the industrial revolution. But when people were spinning with the hand, clothes with the hand, and then these guys turned up with these spindles and all of that, you would never believe that they would actually change the face of manufacturing. But they gave them the money, and every time they gave money, it came back in larger amounts. And every time it came back, they would never spend it on themselves. They would again reinvest it. So the whole industrialization process of Europe was apparently driven by Christian ethic. But speculation, as in gambling, speculation has got two parts to it. It's got the gambling part to it. It's got the risk part to it. I'm not so sure about what is what, but basically any kind of equity where you take risk is actually within quotes better than fixed income in terms of theology, in terms of the church history, which is why actually the Christians in the early church used to actually not be the money lenders. The money lenders were the Jews. The Christians used to be the guys who would give money and then share in the profits or whatever. So they were basically, they were the equity guys, investing in this thing is, you got to remember what investing actually is. It is sharing risk. It's not that some of it does well is the fact. The narrative is that most of it does well and everybody makes big money and we have all the stock. But actually, there are very few people who actually end up making big money. Everybody else talks about making big money, and that's the illusion that you follow.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. Is it wise to save and invest in post office since the government is withdrawing support from most public institutions?
So yeah, so if you asked me that a year ago, I would have said yes. As of now, it's not only the support that they're giving, they're also reducing the interest rates. But technically, it's still, with the highest is actually treasury, which is government bonds, whether it's the Indian government, whether it is the US government. So those are the safest instruments. Yeah? And so that's one kind of savings over there. Then there are subsequently others. So technically your money is safe when you kind of save money over there. But you can actually do, things have changed very dramatically. I'm struggling with what to say as an answer because you can actually do a mutual fund which actually invests in treasury bonds. They typically are called liquid funds. And they buy Government of India bonds. So yeah, you can still save in PPF and other things, but you have got to be very, very careful in terms of not putting everything there. So one principle is never put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, that's critical. But don't spread yourself thin also. It's a dynamic, you need to figure out what works right.
There's a question about the last few slides you had in the presentation with regards to Proverbs 31, and there were some percentages there. So there's an inquiry about what those percentages meant.
So basically, those percentages are slightly arbitrary, which is how much time you spend on each of those instruments. So insurance is something which you don't kind of think about. But so right now, the least amount of time we spend is on insurance, but we should be spending at least 20% of our time on insurance because you're not actually getting returns. And this is something that we keep, forgetting. In fact, I had a bank officer visit me the other day, and she was a young girl, so I asked her, "You're trying to sell me this savings thing, but do you have insurance?" I asked her. She said, "Sir, that's the first thing I have because my father died and my mother brought us up. So I'm a single mother's child. And the only thing she made us buy is insurance, actually." So yeah, I think so. It's just that we need to think of insurance much more critically than the way we are taught about it, because we're only taught about using insurance as savings, and it's a very inefficient form of savings because you actually lose money in trying to save in insurance instruments.
So on the subject of insurance, there's a question about for life insurance, do you suggest term life insurance or an insurance with money back facilities?
Definitely term, if you don't have any other insurance product. And there are ways to think about it, and you should basically, if you are single, taking care of parents and things like that, if you have responsibilities, I think you should think of at least 40 times your annual salary as buying a term policy. That's your ballpark.
Another related question, it's kind of practical. What do you think is the best option, sovereign gold bonds or physical gold?
Physical gold is easy to kind of get to, but nowadays, especially if you bank, they have, most banks have what is called a 3-in-1 account. I bank with ICICI and now I've been with them for, and they sold me this something like 30 years ago, where you buy your bank account and a brokerage account and a demat account, all linked. So the reason why I'm saying that is you need all those three to buy gold. Then you don't need to buy physical gold. You can buy an ETF gold, which is just like physical gold, except that you can buy it in smaller amounts of 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, whenever you have any money. And I think it's worth it because there's a lot of trouble going through trying to get these banks to let you open these, demat linked accounts because services are not very good. But if you push for that, So that's an ideal way to do that. Then you have gold funds, which you can buy, which is in the mutual fund where a manager manages it for you. But you kind of lose. So in ETF, the management fee is 0.11, right? If you give it to a fund, the management fee is 1.2%. Yeah. And if you buy gold yourself, there's no management fee, So that's the difference. But the convenience is that ETFs are very convenient. Then when somebody else manages for you, it's also, it's not linked to the price of gold, but an ETF is linked to the price of
gold. There's a question about, let me just read it out. I have just started earning enough to save. I'm single and I'm looking to take up a PhD soon. What would be the first things I should do in addition to insurance?
So that's good news. And if you're beginning to just start saving, I would say, because you're going to start a PhD, at the same time, you want a bit of a kicker where the money potentially might grow a bit faster than 6% or 7%. So a hybrid debt fund basically allows you to put 70 rupees out of every 100 of yours in debt. So you get around 6-7%. And the remaining 20%, they will put in equity or put it into something which potentially can go up or down. So it's both works both ways. So most mutual funds have this hybrid debt, which basically has got a small element of equity. So in case the markets go up, you are good for it. I'm assuming that you will, when you say that you're starting a PhD, you might potentially need this money to dip into it. If you don't need this money to dip into it, then you can go in for a balanced or a full equity kind of thing. Always, do it in proportion. So don't put all your money into one thing. Have a proportion where you put 20% in risk, which is high, which is just a straightforward mutual fund. Put 30% in balanced and put the remaining 50% in hybrid.
Great. We've got, let me just read out this question. Even after topping the 1.5 lakh limit on my IT investments, my per month deductions or TDS are still very high. How do I manage this? There's another follow-up. What balance is ideal in an investment portfolio between long-term savings instruments and short-term immediate cash instruments, given a highly unpredictable market?
I think that's where I think it's time you buy a house or look at ATCC kind of, which is the second tax benefits the government is giving you, which is longer term. You can buy infrastructure bonds, you can do things like that. But basically, put your money into more longer term things. You can open a PPF account for your children. That's another way to kind of do that. If the girl child, you have that Sukanya scheme, which is a very good scheme for the girl child. That's because that gives you also the tax break. So the second category is what you look at, the ATC.
And the second question is, what balance is ideal in an investment portfolio between long-term savings instruments and short-term immediate cash instruments, given a highly unpredictable market?
Actually, these are, yes, one of the important things to see is the market. But I think the way to actually look at it is to think about your own life journey. And what is it that you're doing? What is it that you want to do? Because that is where the balance is struck. If you want to kind of need money for investing in yourself, teaching yourself a new skill, doing something new, ring fencing the family, you might want to, put larger amounts in equity. And how much money you need for what you want to do. So that's one thing. And I want to encourage you all to think more about not only what you're doing, your career, but also to think about potentially what you're called to, what is your vocation. And you think of investing in that, because that's also an extremely important part of it. And putting money aside for that is as important as putting money aside for your own savings. Yeah.
All right. Let me move on to. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Actually, it's a bit of an individual question.
Yeah.
And there can't be a general principle for that.
Right. All right, let me ask another one. Should we go for housing and car loans in which interest rate is linked with external benchmarks like repo rate, or should we go for a fixed interest rate?
If you're doing housing, in fact, actually, so I'll just tell you about what I did, because when we got our housing loan, the fixed rate was much higher relatively to the floating rate. But I went for the fixed rate because even that time I thought we were not so sure of what was happening in the economy. So if you're doing housing, I would encourage you to kind of go for a fixed rate. It typically is 2 to 3 percentage points higher than a floating rate. But especially now, we really don't know what's going to happen to the macros. There's I'm trying to find the right word. It's like a domino set falling because of either mismanagement or because of other issues. So, but a short-term loan, you could possibly, link, take a car loan, which is more flexible. But what is important is that you also build a pool, whether you're in debt or not, you should always have a 3-month pool of money that is there as your reserve at any given point in time. That's the benchmark, that you got to first build your 3 months of reserve and then do anything else. And if you find that, the car loan is too much, I keep encouraging, in the early days of our lives, we only bought second-hand cars. And you get pretty good second-hand cars because you get mad people who actually go out and buy cars and then want to sell it in 2 months' time. So you get nearly new cars. In fact, I took a wild guess and I went to this agent and I told him, if a car is done less than 2,000 kilometers, call me. And he called me in 2 weeks' time. He said, brand new car coming. So, people are constantly mismanaging money. So it's and we got it at 30 or 40% off, and it lasted us. It's still with a friend of ours. It's such a good car, So especially if you're young, you don't want to waste your money on what I call depreciating assets. When you're old like me and all, then you can think of all these fancy things. But even now, it doesn't attract me. Anything that loses value, because the moment you drive out of the garage with your car, it's already down 30,000 rupees or 40,000 rupees. Yeah. So, why do you want to, as a young person, have an asset that is like that,
All right. Let me see. There's another question here. You mentioned investing money to reap benefits 30 years later. Can you share some options of such investments?
So, for the Sukhanya scheme for children were not there, in fact. So my father used to give me, 1,000, 2,000 rupees occasionally for the children, which actually I put into a children's fund that HDFC had. And you can only put in money till they're 19 over there. And that's actually grown quite a bit. So now when they're big girls, so that's a good way to kind of look at long-term money. But also, most of these mutual funds have, now they've got very sophisticated. They've also got these large cap things. I would try and put some money into large cap funds that, So mutual funds are the best way to kind of do this, unless you're an active manager yourself and can actually look after your own money, then you directly invest in some shares of good companies. But there is also this saying that every 10 years, 40% of the Sensex companies are out, which means that 40% of these big companies are actually not doing well. They've been removed from the Sensex. So to answer your question, you can actually buy a Nifty or a Sensex fund. So irrespective of who does what, and that's also an ETF. ETFs are exchange traded funds. So they have the least management cost. And because they have the least management cost, so you are charged 0.1 or something like that in an ETF, as opposed to a proper mutual fund where you're charged much more. And so what that does is it's like a passive management, which is that whatever company is in the Sensex, that fund will buy, and whenever a company is removed, it will buy the new company. So, you must talk to somebody, because, in many ways, these questions. So I'm just giving you the options to think about, but talk to somebody and then, take a call. But also do your research, yeah? Don't just go with what people tell you. That's very, very important. Always do your research. And nowadays, there's so much information available. In fact, as a memorial, I used to buy these old magazines on the streets to do my research. I've kept a few of them just to show my children that this is how actually you have to read up and find things when we were young.
Okay, great. Let me ask another one. Can you give us some guidance on seeking out ethical spending methods? A certain amount of spending is essential. So how can we choose to spend in ways that support the local economy, local communities, rather than large corporations with exploitative, extractive practices?
It's a difficult one, because in India, we have very few what is called, so the question you're asking is whether there are what they call ESG funds, environmental, social, and other aspects that they look at. Let me plug a company which I've never ever done anything on. It's called the Quantum Fund. It's a mutual fund that's a very small. They charge the least amount of money. They do the best amount of research, and they also make the best investments. So if you want to kind of look at things, Quantum, based in Bombay by, I think, a guy called Dayal, is one of the better non-advertised mutual funds. And they also have, I don't know if you all know this guy called Raghuram Rajan, who used to be our deputy governor. His younger brother is actually used to be one of the big guys at Tata's. He's left that and he's joined this small company to help start up a ESG fund. So follow Quantum in terms of doing things. Also, when I was a young person, I kind of also was looking for this. So I remember I invested in a fertilizer company that was made up of earthworms. I lost all my money. So you got to be sure that you also want to support these things, but they are very good ideas. And I would encourage you to think about it, because unfortunately, I actually am a director on a fund which just does that. But we don't have any India, retail things. We only do wholesale. We are based out of Hyderabad, and we lend into agriculture, education, healthcare, and other things. Energy, alternative energy, so solar and things like that is what we do. But we don't have a retail receipt window. We only do wholesale. But I think as you watch this space, it will evolve, and you will have mutual funds that will do this also. But Quantum has, look at Quantum. They always have something interesting going on. They're an extremely small fund, so you'll have to really look for them.
Okay, there's a question related to a church. Could you please help as to which kind of account would be good for churches, especially in the current situation? We're a trust, I'm assuming a religious trust, and any suggestions for the savings part of it?
Have a savings account and actually use one of the big banks. Don't, so one key recommendation is now its size matters. Okay. Before, if you're in a small bank, just be careful. You need to go for HDFC, ICICI, State Bank of India, Axis. I'm not so sure anything more than that is what you want to kind of deal with. So those are the big things that you want to put into. And they have actually, if all your trustees of the church can sign, you can buy liquid mutual funds and they'll buy it for you. Also you are compliant with the Charities Commissioner tax laws because they allow for mutual funds and government treasury bonds are allowed under that. So as a church, you might want to be, on the safest side.
All right. I have an education loan and a mortgage loan. I'd ideally like to close both of these using some money that I can borrow from my relatives without interest. The bank offered to waive the interest and pre-closure amount. Paying interest every month has been bothering me. Do you have any advice?
The mortgage should be giving you a tax break also. So if you're not taking a tax break on your housing loan, on the mortgage, so first go and do that, start getting some benefits on that so that at least on your income side, so you have to pay the EMI, but when you file your tax things, the government gives that money back to you. Yeah. So do that as a first step. The second step is, I would keep the housing loan going, the education loan, and actually both these questions, actually the question is contingent on the size of the loan relative to your income. But I would suggest that, as a young person, it's all right not to have discretionary because you're building an asset also. Remember, if you're not putting into your house, you would have to go and shop around for mutual funds and see what you want to invest in. Yeah. So remember that when you're buying a house, you're also building an asset that tomorrow you can go and sell. Today the prices are down, it's like anything else. So it's not only a house that's taking care of you, but it's also an asset that you can dispose at some point because you have to have some asset that you're constructing. So the house, I would definitely ask you to rethink about the education loan, if it's kind of, so the benchmark number in terms of loan to income is 30%. If it's less than 30%, if it's bothering you, learn to deal with that. Because I think this is where one of the problems of, both the behavioral sciences people and Mr. Paul from the Book of Romans says, we kind of don't, we get overwhelmed by many things, and we need to kind of renew our minds, which is why I'm inviting you all actually that the heart of finance is actually renewing your mind. How much of our own behavior is conditioned by the world? How much of our own values are conditioned by the world? We need to examine each of those carefully. So, within that context, I would say, encourage you to look at those and then make your decision. Those are only tools I can give you, but I'm sure others in the group can help you think through that. Because like even Dan Ariely and the behavioral economist said, half the time you lose money because you panic. Half the time you lose money because you're overwhelmed. So work with your mind and, work with the spirit, and then make your decision.
All right, we've got a couple more questions. There's one question that I think you answered, but I'll ask it. And if you have anything to add to it, go ahead. So what should one keep in mind while building an emergency fund? I think you mentioned you should have at least 3 months before you invest anything else. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, 3 months is good.
Okay. And is it prudent to buy a plot of land with a loan from a bank?
If that is your first asset, first investment, go and check whether you'll get your tax breaks on that. Be compliant on the tax benefit, because it's important as a young person not to take the tax benefit, which is why the government is actually giving you that break, because the housing, we only think of tax as, benefits that we get. But remember, you're doing so much with the economy. The construction industry is one of the biggest industries that's kind of been wiped out in India. Part of the 11 million people going back to the villages, which you saw only now, but actually if you see the economic numbers, another 11 million left the cities and went back to the villages before this lockdown. That's how bad the economy is. And the construction sector is a big contributor to that. So, if you do anything in construction, if you do anything in housing, remember also that you're doing something for the country. We need to get that sector, that part of the economy going, because it employs so many people. It employs so many, uneducated village women can get jobs as, moving bricks. There's so many things that happen, Remember that spending, and if you spend well, you are stimulating a lot of the economy. So, yeah, look at land, but I would think that, depending on what you can manage, always weigh up what you can manage with what you want to invest in. It's very easy to think of buying the land, but land as opposed to a flat, and I'm sure it's not in a big city, because otherwise it'll be very expensive. But if it's there, but get the benefits.
One question I want to get to before we run out of time, and this I think will be a future help even after this call. But do you have any reading recommendations to help manage everyday finance? And I think even beyond that, just any follow-up reading material that people could get their hands on to just get a better handle on managing money.
I think that, so I would say 2 things you should definitely focus on. One is, and today there's a lot of research which is also available. I would strongly recommend reread Romans because Paul has been, we kind of looked at his whole thing of the mind very differently from the way he's emphasizing it actually. Yeah. In the question of money, reread Romans first. Second, you might want to actually occasionally read these behavioral psychologists. Dan Ariely is one guy I talked about, because they have done so much research on actually seeing how much of our own behavior is being shaped by values of the world, which these guys are trying to sell. Even he's saying, they're trying to make you spend more than save. Yeah, they give you all the instruments. They tell you how big a guy you'll become if you use my credit card. Whereas actually you should be thinking the other way. So behavior and behavioral economics, you'll find a lot of stuff. And today, you can read globally, you can read Dan on the net. Yeah. And there are 20 other guys. There's an Indian kid called Senthil Mulyandan, who's based out of Chicago, works under Raghuram's department, who's also done a lot of research on, these SMSs that come, by banks and other things. Those are very useful things in terms of encouraging us to save. He's looked at this whole savings behavior. So look at, they're interesting things to read. So don't only read about money. Yeah, read about all this, and behavioral economists, they're doing some very, very interesting research. It'll help you also reflect on your own behavior. And finally, actually, on mutual funds, there's a very good site called Value Research. Go to that site. Anytime you want to buy a mutual fund, open an account there. It's free. You can even subscribe if you want. They have a free account. You can go. It'll tell you the insides of each fund. Which shares the fund own, who's the fund manager, what is the strategy of the fund. Value Research is the one that you might want to look at. And then if you subscribe to a newspaper, there are lots of finance and savings columns. But if you read the Mint, Monica Harlan does a very good set of articles regularly on savings. So you can go to Mint on the site and Google Monica Harlan, and you will see basic things on savings and all that. So she's very good. But that should be your sweep of things to read.
Great. There's a question on when investing in shares, which sectors should we look for in the long term?
In the long term, we're all dead. That's what they say. And in fact, actually, the guru of long term was somebody called Warren Buffett. And the other day I saw a program by an Indian fund manager dismantling his long-term investment, basically saying that he would have earned more if he had put money into. So one of the big things that Warren invested in was Coke. So they looked at the period of, the time, they calculated everything. They said he would have made 13 times more money if he had put money in Pepsi, and some 20 times more if he had just bought the index. So, index funds were never there when I was growing, so I've never had an experience, but I would encourage you to think of index funds, because that's a very low cost management fee. So your fund earns more, and B, that takes the top 50 companies. So once you've kind of built your savings, then think of going into shares, because the risks are higher. Yeah. So then I would say that the two sectors that are emerging now are going to be information technology and pharma, because they also are not linked to the Indian economy. So you want to protect yourself from any local currency risk that might happen. So I would encourage you to first look at index funds, build your savings, have a good base there. You got to be ready for a depression that you'll go through unnecessarily. So it's very easy to think of those, but yes, if you do, that's one way to look at it. But those are the two broad sectors, I would say. And then within that, you can do some research, do some reading, and see what you want to do. But this is true for only the next 3 to 5 years. It might change. Tomorrow, Trump does something in terms of not allowing, foreign companies to, provide services. They're already putting up a $300 million fund to retrain Americans to attend to all H-1B jobs. So that's a risk for the technology sector.
Okay, great. I think we've gone through most questions. If I've missed yours, I apologize, but we're running out of time and we want to finish on time. So thank you, Mr. Titus. It's been a really helpful, practical webinar with you. We're really grateful for your time and everything you shared with us. And if you want if you're a member of Redeemer and you want to talk more about money, we're identifying a couple of people who can help with practical stuff and can help you take next steps. So that's if you need any help in that matter, you can reach out to me, and we can follow up. So great. Thank you so much for being with us, everyone. It's been great to see you here on Saturday morning, and thank you again, Mr. Titus, for being with us.